Kingdom by Bernard Cornwell is a historical fictional novel that tells the story of Uhtred of Bebbanburg, a Saxon noble who was kidnapped by the Vikings as a child and raised by them. So Uhtred was a real person, however, just from a different century. So who was the real Uhtred? Let's find out. He was first and foremost a renowned warrior, and he was also connected to the kings of Wessex, even marrying a daughter of the royal house. So the Last Kingdom book series themselves were set in the 9th and 10th century England, and it covers the years 909 to 911. However, the real Uhtred was actually born sometime later in the 10th century and became the Ealdorman or Earl of Northumbria in the early 11th century. His king was Ethelred the Unready, and it was a king who was descended from Alfred the Great, although he had a very different character. This Uhtred, like Uhtred of the books, was married many times, and he also had enemies and allies within the Viking descended community of Danelaw. He was a son of the Earl of Northumberland called Wulfthor and had a brother called Adolf. So I am probably going to be pronouncing these wrong, so I do really apologise. I'm going to pronounce them the best I can. Historical knowledge of this period is of course dependent on who wrote it down and what they deemed important to write down. Literacy was very much a church thing, and because of this the records are very much based toward the religious community. Because as I said, they would write down what they thought was important, so they would focus on religious information, religious studies. Record keeping was given a massive boost by Alfred the Great, who decided to encourage to keep records in these annuals. This was in order to promote literacy and to ensure that his dynasty would be remembered. We know from these records that Uhtred had connections with Aldhelm, the Bishop of Durham, as he married his daughter. At this earlier time, the church, particularly in the north, could be something of a family business with clerics, a bit like landed aristocrats. This seems to have been the background for Uhtred's marriage, as a number of states actually went to him as a dowry. Through this connection, Uhtred was involved in the new site for the Church of St. Cuthbert in Durham and was noted to have helped clear the area in AD 995. This could actually be a clue as to around the period of when he got married, and it's believed that Uhtred was a fully grown man at this point as well. Before the creation of this new monastery, however, the relics of St. Cuthbert and his community had been centred on a church at Chester Street, where they had settled in AD 883. This religious community, of course, had begun its life in Lindisfarne, and this is a site that is associated with Bamburgh both geographically and historically. During the 9th century, they travelled for many years across Northumbria seeking a new home and eventually landing in Durham. We're not sure how long Uhtred was in this marriage for, but we hear of a second marriage that actually took place before 1005. This was to a woman called Siege, daughter of Styr, son of Ulf. Now, marriages of aristocrats at this time were very much political or even just something of a business transaction, and this marriage seems to have been of the political type, connecting Uhtred with a powerful and wealthy Danish family. This was perhaps intended to generate some leverage and influence to the south of their own heartland that lay north of the River Tees. The political relationship between those who controlled the former parts of the Kingdom of Northumbria, so the north and south of the River Tees, does actually end up becoming a recurring theme. And the second marriage of Uhtred's will actually have huge ramifications that will be felt for his descendants for several generations, but also ramifications on his own fate. So Uhtred got married again, and this third marriage begins with a conflict from further north. Malcolm II had just become the King of Scotland and decided to raid Northumbria in 1005 AD. Now, this may have just been an attempt to show off with his military skills and abilities and to add to his prestige, because he actually came to the crown by killing his predecessor in battle, and he may not have felt 100% secure on the throne at that point. Whatever the reason though, this just didn't go to plan. Uhtred's father was old and infirm and decided to seek refuge in Bamburgh rather than go and have a battle. However, the same could not be said of Uhtred, who raised a force and met Malcolm in battle, inflicting defeat. It's then reported that Uhtred decorated the halls of Durham with the heads of his enemies. As a result of this, Ethelred, the King of England, had had a few military successes against a generation of Viking enemies. But he then actually wanted a connection with this successful warrior and therefore arranged a marriage of Uhtred to one of his daughters. This involved Uhtred setting aside his current wife, an action that would have damaged or broken the connection with her family. Now it's very likely as well that this also weakened Uhtred's position in the north, losing him important allies that seem to have played a part in his recent victories, and all for an alliance with a weak king whose reign would end in his own heir rebelling against him. At the time, a connection by marriage to Ethelred was likely to have seemed a good route for him to have political influence in the royal court. And at first it seems to have worked out well for Uhtred and Ethelred, but it didn't stand in the way of Uhtred having to make a ruthless decision when needed. In 1013, he actually switched allegiance to Sweyn, one of those, of Denmark. When Ethelred's position became so weak, Uhtred must have felt it threatened his remaining in power as an earl. He changed sides again when Sweyn died, but at this time he appears to have been more closely associated with Edmund, who was Ethelred's eldest surviving son. He was in a position of near open rebellion to his sick and ailing father. Ruthless politics as this may have been, it did not work out well in the longer run. Canute was Svein's son, and he had taken control of his father's army. At his death was now the rival that Uhtred and Edmund must resist. But things did not go well. Canute outflanked Uhtred and invaded Northumbria when Uhtred was in the Midlands with Edmund. Uhtred, being one of the most important and powerful figures in the north, was always going to be the key to how Canute dealt with the north. He needed him at least something of an ally, or he needed him out of the picture. Finding his enemy was in a position to cut him off from his land and earldom, Uhtred opened negotiations. Hostages were exchanged between them to ensure good conduct, and a meeting was arranged. At a place called Wyhill, Uhtred arrived with 40 of his followers, only to be attacked and killed in ambush by the forces of one of his enemies, who had been lying in wait for them, concealed behind the hangings in the hall. You could argue as a suitable end to a dramatic life. This act was quite likely a consequence to one of Uhtred's earlier marriages and the complex political powers of the north. So the historical Uhtred was clearly a warrior, like his namesake in the book, and he had indeed some points that the fictional version may have drawn on, but he was a man of a very different era. I think we can be safe to say that Uhtred, the real one, was a fearsome warrior. Maybe he made some choices to help him elevate himself politically or as an alderman in the king's favour, anything like that. But who didn't in that time? Who wasn't reigning rebellion and planning to kill and siege and raid? I love The Last Kingdom. It is one of my favourite series, and I just think it's one of those things where the book is amazing and the adaptation is just as well. It's been cast extremely well, and it's something that I watch every single year, so I do really recommend, if you haven't seen it, do go and see it. I've also visited Bamburgh Castle. Do check out my short because it was an amazing time, and I've also done a whole video on what it was like going there as well. So if you do get a chance to go, just the castle itself is breathtaking, even if you didn't know the history behind it. But that's it for today, guys. I just wanted to share the story of the real Uhtred with you. Such an amazing man in fiction and in real life. I think it's a life that deserves to be known. Like the video, guys, if you liked it. Do subscribe, we've got a lot of cool stuff coming out, I don't want you to miss out. And until next time, you take care.